Hey, welcome to Smallmouth Crush. My name's Travis. I don't care what part of the country you're from. Smallmouth bass love tubes. And we're going to talk all about tubes coming up. All right, I love fishing a tube. I've been fishing tubes for years. They're effective, they're easy to use, and they catch a big bass. And I mean, it can be intimidating at times. There's so many different sizes, so many different colors. Where do you start? Where do you begin? Well, I think I have a pretty good system. I have just a select number of colors, number of sizes that I rotate through. And so I really want to break it down for you guys to give you a little bit idea of how simple it actually can be. So let's start out with my tube setup in general. So I have a couple different boxes dedicated to tubes. So the first box would be, it's called miscellaneous tubes. This is going to be different colors that I don't use that often, but do come into play. So if I open it up here, I'm going to see a lot of whites, some smoked purples, some chartreuse, some lime green, just some good colors, and they do work. I just don't throw these as often as some of the other colors. That's why they're called miscellaneous tubes. Another box is going to be a little bit bigger. So this is kind of like a go-to box if I'm going to a specific lake where I know this color comes into play. So in this box, you're going to find some pretty unique colors. Anything from a perch colored tube, rusty crawfish up in the northern part of the country. I'm going to have some, I guess that's like an emerald. Well, here's the emerald shiner. So alewife, baitfish type of baits. There's some that I prefer to throw, like if there's a white bottom, like a white sandy bottom, or a light tan bottom. There's some unique color tubes here that I'll throw that give me a really good contrast. Because you got to remember, the crayfish, the gobies, the baitfish, whatever's living in that color of bottom, in that water, they're trying to blend in. So you also want your tube, for the most part, to blend in as well, yet not blend in too much that a smallmouth won't be able to tell that your bait's even there. So that's why I kind of do some different contrasting colors, and it looks like this tube's trying to be sneaky, and it darts just a little bit, and that bass goes, what's that? And goes, wow, right? Just grabs it. I love fishing tubes. Did I tell you that already? So then I have my go-to tube box, right? This thing, I mean, if I'm going anywhere, this thing is coming with me. This goes in the boat regardless. If I don't want to bring all this other stuff, this definitely has to come. So we open this up. Oh my gosh. So these are all my favorite colored tubes. And they're all about three different sizes. I got a 2 3/4, a 3 1/2, and then a 3 1/2 that's a little bit more slender. Those are the three main sizes I use. Every once in a while, I'll break it down and I'll go with a 2 1/2 finesse tube. So that's going to look like this. That's more for high pressured areas, finesse fishing, slower presentation, maybe colder waters. I drag a finesse tube quite a bit. Seems to work really well. You'll also want to use this if the crayfish are smaller, the baitfish are a little bit smaller. So wherever you're fishing, that location is going to dictate the size of the tube as well as the color, of course. But getting back to the go-to tubes, I don't even know where to start. I mean, there is some, the dark melon, right? This is a 2 3/4 dark melon. This works anywhere across the country. Especially works if the water's clear. It really works if you're on the Great Lakes. It works even better if you're on Lake Ontario. Even works better if you're on the Canadian side of Lake Ontario. And it's even better if you're next to a power plant. That's all I'm going to say. It's a really good tube. Green pumpkin, dark melon, and a color called leech. Ooh, leech. It's kind of like a grayish brown color. It's a really good color to use. And all of these are actually made by one company. All the tubes in the go-to tube box are made by a company called Get Bit Baits. Guy out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, land of the giant smallmouths. This dude's been dealing with tubes for quite a while. I've been getting all my tubes from him. I mean, going on probably since 07, 08. So quite a few years. He knows what he's talking about. He knows all the good colors. People from all over the country order tubes from him. So if you want a good color for your lake, give him a call. He probably already knows a bunch of people that are buying tubes to fish on that particular water, and he could probably direct you in the right way. Just a fantastic tube. It's really nice and soft. It's got, the appendagers here. It's just, it flows. It flows awesomely, right? I can't say enough about them. So those are the main tubes that I like to use as far as tube fishing. Stay on track, Travis. What else do I want to talk about? We got to talk about these specialty tubes, the Extreme tubes. These are the Extreme Tackle Company, I guess it's called. I got my note down there. Extreme Bass Tackle. I only order maybe once every few years. I order in bulk from them, so I don't have to order too much. But again, these were the specialty colors. So if Get Bit Baits, doesn't have a really good perch color tube, I'm going to go to the Extreme Tackle and purchase it from there. But those are just ones for specific situations. I normally can get by with the go-to box and I'm fine. But I do bring these along. So I'll bring all of these tubes if I'm going to a lake I've never been to, or if I want to experiment a little bit, try something different. But for the most part, that go-to box, the 2.5 finesse tubes, they go with me and it's good to go. Now I have a huge bin. It's one of those Rubbermaid plastic bins that's stacked full of tubes. And so if I'm going on a tournament or just on a long extended fishing trip, I'll throw that big box in the back of the vehicle, and that way I have more tubes, more supply if I need it. And then, once I get low, I just go in that box and fill these back up and keep these nice and full so I don't run into, running out of any colors, things like that. And that big bin works out nice too. All your buddies need a tube color. They find something going in practice, so they know you're the tube guy. And of course I got so many, man, and it's just, I love fishing tubes. It's such a fun yet simple way to catch fish. And it's great. The tube is designed to mimic a crayfish, a goby, baitfish, anything like that. And I want to tell you about Get Bit Baits. They also make, see these strands in this tube? So Dan's the owner. I believe he, every night for about 4 or 5 hours a night, he'll sit on his couch and he'll thread these tubes, right? While he's watching CSI or whatever. America's Got Talent. He'll sit there and watch America's Got Talent while he's weaving these magic tubes. And he does a great job. I don't have the patience for him. But they really work well, especially in a more finesse or slower presentation. They work great on beds, by the way. You can just throw this tube, let it sit in there, and these strands are just gonna naturally flow around, and that fish can be like, what's that? What's that little movement going on? And they're gonna get curious, and then eventually they're gonna go, right? And set the hook. Ooh. And he puts a lot of salt on his tubes, which is fine. I need a little iodine in my diet anyways. So let's talk about the tube heads, okay? Basically, there's going to be two types of hooks that I use. A Barbarian, which I love to use in the 3.5 tubes, a little bit bigger tubes, and then a round bend hook, which is great, more compact, fits nicely into slender tubes and the 2 3/4 inch. And then I carry a variety of sizes. So I have my little go-to tube head box. This goes in the boat. All the sizes are in here. Then some specialty sizes as well. Then I also carry this box. Well, I bring this once in a while to a tournament. This just sits in the garage. It's kind of a refill, although there's some round heads in here. So instead of the, I don't know, what's that? The teardrop insert, I'll have a round ball insert. This is good if you're, if you want a straight drop on a tube. If you don't like it spinning and swirling around, you just want it boom. Or if you're sight fishing, put it on a bed. That ball head works great inside. Even the bigger ones too can mimic a goby, you know, a little fatter head. So there's different, those come into play every once in a while. Then this here box has everything. This is like the mother box that supplies this box when this gets low. And there's some unique ones in here. Of course, the goby head inserts right there. I think Mark Zone is part of that company or designed these. He's tied into it some way, somehow. Great tube insert. Then another gentleman, Art Ferguson, out of Lake Erie. He's a real good angler up there. He makes these tube inserts that, as you can see, they're very, I mean, I think that's an ounce. There's a ½ ounce. So the actual lead, what's nice about these, the hooks are awesome and they're very compact. So you can take a smaller tube and put in a heavier weight and not mess up the way that tube's designed to work. These come into play when you're fishing current. Just off the top of my head, St. Clair River, Detroit River, St. Lawrence River, places like that. Really good to get some extra weight, to get that tube down quicker, keep contact with the bottom. And then, of course, if you're rolling in some big waves and you need to fish a tube more effectively on a strategic spot, you can certainly put some more weight in there. I try to go as light as possible, but while maintaining bottom contact. In most situations, I can think of a time or two. Once I was on Lake Erie, I got onto a really unique pattern. I was in 4 feet of water. The fish were up shallow. It was dirty. Wind was blowing in on this point, and it was all chunk rock. And I put in a ½ ounce tube insert, so a real heavy one. And my goal was to get that tube stuck in the crevices of those rocks. And then boomerang, sling it open, right? Do the line deal, snap, and bring that tube up and around. And as soon as it got unhooked, unsnagged, a fish would grab it. And it was a pattern it was a solid deal I had going on. It was pretty cool. So I purposely wanted to get that tube hung up to get a bite. So I went with a heavier tube head. I was in 4 feet of water throwing a ½ ounce tube head to make sure I was getting caught in those crevices and then ricocheting it off and making it, you know, dart around and go erratic, and that fish would just chase it and grab it. You want that to happen all the time. You'll notice when you're dragging a tube that as soon as you get hung up, and a lot of times when you pop it free, that's when the fish bites. So besides just casting to your targets and working it back, so I like to just drag it, reel up the slack, and continue to drag it. You can hop it. You can make, you know, longer jerks with it. You can drag it and then hop it, and you know, if you didn't get hung up, you can imitate it getting hung up. That might draw a reaction strike. So there's a lot of different techniques to use, and you really just have to go out and use them. I can't tell you, you know, this works better than that technique. It goes with experience and what the fish want that given day. So let's talk about the rod I actually use. I use 2 rods for tubes. I use a special rod for dragging the tube, and then I use a special rod when I'm just working a tube, bringing the tube back manually, okay? Not when I'm using the wind and the current to drag behind the boat. So let's start out with, if I'm just throwing the tube around on a rocky shoal, on some reefs, on a point, a grass line, whatever the case may be, I'm going to be throwing a Shimano Stratic. This is a 3000 series reel. I love these reels. I got a bunch of these on all my spinning rods. I like them all to feel, to match up, to be the same. I'm throwing this on a 7-foot medium St. Croix Extreme, Legend Extreme. Great rod. I have a handful of these rods specifically tied on different size tube heads, things like that, if I'm dealing with a tube bite. I use 10-pound braid, so we're going with Power Pro on that. And then I always tie a leader onto that, so directly to the braid, to the leader. And it's just a great setup. It's real light, it's very sensitive, and you'll be able to feel everything, especially with this braid. I mean, it's a deadly combo. Now, as far as the fluorocarbon leader, man, that varies as well. I mean, I've gone as light as 6. I've gone as high as 20. I know 20 sounds extreme, but there's going to be certain situations when you're going to be very thankful you're running, 17 or 20 pound leader when you're fishing a tube. So we'll start out. I use a lot of the Bass Pro Shop 100% fluoro, the 8, 10 pound, 12 pound. I also use Gamma. They're both good fluorocarbon lines. Let's be serious, man. Pretty much any of the big name brand lines are great. Okay, they all work fine. I don't have issues with really any specific brands that I stay away with. I just use what works for me. I like Yozuri Hybrid, so I'll use that quite a bit. But the heavier line, so the 20 pound test line, you might think that's crazy. You're fishing for smallmouth, Travis, with tubes, and you're using 20 pound leader? Well, when your tube is digging and grinding and banging up into zebra mussels and, rocks, all kinds of nasty stuff down there, your line is going to get beat up. And I don't know how many times you feel that tap, you feel that bite, and you go back to set the hook, and for about 2-3 seconds, you feel the fish on, and then nothing. The line breaks. That's a common occurrence when you're dragging a tube. You're going to run into those situations. There's certain lakes, man, you have to use 20 pound fluoro. If you're using 10, yeah, you might get away with it once or twice, but it's going to catch up to you, and it's going to cost you the 2009 Lake Winnebago BFL championship. True story. It ain't the right deal. You have to go with some heavier line in certain situations. Now, you might forfeit a few bites here and there. I don't know. When I'm really using that heavier line, the water's a little bit more dirty. I'm just thinking of some specific lakes that have like a massive, nasty zebra mussel bottom. Gets a little turbulent. There's some silt in the lake and the wind, and so it's not a real crystal clear lake. That's when I'll upsize my leader and kind of go from there. So back on track here. Dragging a tube. Of course, tubes work. I gotta mention, tubes work great for largemouth. I just wanted to kind of talk more specifically about smallmouth fishing a tube. I will definitely get into some videos on flipping a tube, Carolina rigging a tube, although you can see rig a tube for smallies and it works great as well. That's a technique I use quite a bit. But they do catch largemouth as well, but we're going to try to stay on topic here. Let's talk about drop shot in a tube real quick. And I'm going to do a whole nother video on drop shot, and that's a whole nother world. But real quickly, owner number 2, mosquitoes. That's what I'll use to drop shot. Let's grab one here. And we'll take this tube, for instance, and I'll basically just nose hook that tube like so. And I'll drop shot with that. And that's great when dragging a tube might not work. It's great around the beds, sight fishing, things like that. Just another little tip here that I don't know if a lot of the guys are drop shotting tubes or not, but it's something I do all the time. Now, let's talk about dragging a tube. So when you're actually using the current or the wind to move your boat. So you got your trolling motor, you're positioning yourself over whatever type of structure you want to drag that tube across. You might have some drift socks. If it's really windy, I use 2 drift socks, one at the bow, one at the transom to slow the boat down. The power poles also have drift paddles that work great to slow you down. So there's a lot of options to make that tube drift around down there. I'm all tangled up here, guys. Hold on. Okay. So when I'm dragging a tube, throwing that tube way off, and basically just holding the rod down and letting that tube just continuously hit the bottom. I'm dragging it along. A lot of times it's on a very long cast. It's a long cast and then some, letting quite a bit of line out to get that tube to where you need it to get to. And a lot of times I'll use a 1/4 ounce. I just want that tube to just bang every once in a while Sometimes I want it to continuously stay on the ground and bang it in. Sometimes I just want it to bounce off of a rock or two and float around. I feel that using mono for that technique seems to work a little bit better. It definitely helps with the debris and stuff on the bottom and line weakening, but I think it also helps keep that tube a little bit up and banging off of rocks and just kind of bouncing along down there, especially a lighter size tube. And so that line is way out there. Often you'll feel the bite, and all of a sudden you'll see the fish jumping way out there, and you just got to reel up on it. So I use a 7.6, 7.5 foot Legend Extreme. This is a medium light reel. Great action, just like the medium. It's just a little bit lighter tip that allows me to, I feel allows me to get a better hook set, especially when I'm dragging and it's so far behind the boat. Same deal, 3000 Shimano, and of course the mono. Probably start out around 10, 8, 10 to 12, somewhere around there. I have dragged with braid before, and it's great. I mean, you can feel everything, but you get hung up quite a bit too. So that's why I started really just going with the mono. I use Suffix Elite quite a bit. Just a good mono that I found. What else? I mean, okay, so I covered pretty much quite a bit on the tubes. Crash course, just want to let you know, these are legit. They've been around forever. They do catch fish. I would suggest start throwing them more often. You might surprise yourself. Hey, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Leave any comments below. What kind of tubes you guys like to throw? What's your secret for tube fishing? I'd love to hear about it. Until then, we'll see you guys on the water.